Hello and welcome. My name is Marcus Doeringer and I'm a solution specialist in the EMEA Cloud Data Management Organization. Today we will have a look at OCI database migration, or the short name DMS, and I will show you how DMS can help our customers to migrate their databases to OCI. Now, I will spend the first 15 minutes really just on a few slides just to give you a better understanding of the basics of the service itself. But then I will switch over to OCI and I will show you a little bit around in the service on OCI. And as Mia already said, if you have any question, please post them in the Q&A. So when you look at that summary page for DMS, the important thing here is that with DMS, we really want to simplify the database migration workflow. So we already have lots of different tools and technologies we can use for database migration. We have tools like RMAN, the recovery manager. We have tools, Datapump, Golden Gate. And it's important to understand that DMS basically is leveraging those existing technology to do the actual migration with an easy to use user experience. So we have not reinvented the wheel, or we created some new technology how to migrate the database. We really use the existing technology we have today, but database migration basically uses that tools. So you can think of DMS more like a migration orchestrator or scheduler that is using that technology. And if you look at the pyramid here on the right side, you can also see that between OCI database migration and the tools that we are actually using to do the migration, there is another product called Zero Downtime Migration, or ZDM, and you probably have heard about that already. So when I talked about that orchestrator that is using that tools to do the actual migration, I was actually talking about Zero Downtime Migration, because Zero Downtime Migration, the engine, is actually the software that executes the migration itself. So Zero Downtime Migration logs into the source system, extracts the data, it uploads the data to object storage, for example, and then imports the data to our target database. So this is done by Zero Downtime Migration. And OCI database migration is then based on Zero Downtime Migration and gives us this nice service in the OCI console where we can basically configure the Zero Downtime Migration instance that is running in the background. But I will also have a slide later for that one to really compare or see the differences between Zero Downtime Migration and OCI database migration. Now, before we go more into detail with the DMS, let's discuss two migration methods we typically classify migrations into. We have physical migration and logical migration. And with a physical migration, let's go away for now for the data from the databases. Imagine you have a text document on your laptop and you have upgraded to a new laptop and you want to migrate that text document to your new laptop. So the simplest way to do that is possibly just to attach an external hard disk to your old laptop, to copy over that file and then copy that file to your new laptop. So what you end up basically with the same document on your new laptop, and that is what we call a physical migration. So we actually do a really block copy of that file to the target system. Now, think of the same scenario, but this time you also get the new laptop, but you switch from Windows to Linux, and on Linux you don't have the same program available to open that text document, and so you want to migrate to a new program, and maybe you are also found out that you already have 100 pages in that text document, but you're only interested in 20 pages of them. So what you then typically do is you create a new document in your new program on your new laptop, and then you really select the text that you want to migrate. You copy that text and you insert it into your new document. So that way you end up with a completely new document on your new laptop. Of course, you can see here that this migration approach is much more flexible, because we also, for example, can change the font size, we can change the line breaks, but it's a little bit more complicated compared to the physical migration we do here. And we may not end up with exactly the same document here on the target system that we had on our source system. And basically the same translates to the database. So when we have a database running on Linux, for example, a 12.2 database, the data of that database is stored in database files on the file system. It may be direct file system on the operating system, or ASM, for example. And what we can do in a physical migration, we copy over those files directly to the target system, and we end up with the same database on our target system. Now, with a database logical migration, again, same scenario. We have our database running on 12.2 Linux system, but this time we want to migrate to autonomous database. And here we cannot copy over the data files from the database because we don't have access to the underlying system. For example, we don't have DBA access to the container. We don't have root access to the operating system. So the way we need to migrate our database, remember the example with the text document, we have to extract the data and then load the data into the autonomous database. So this is a logical migration. Every time we need to extract the data and we load the data, again, in a different database, we're talking about a logical migration. Now, there are different migration types in DMS, and here is a short overview. We also classify in offline and online migration. With offline migration, we really do a one-time copy of the database. So if this is a production migration, we then need to stop all applications. We migrate our database, and then again, we can start our application. Whereas with an online migration, we do an initial copy of the database, and then we capture all the changes on the source database and we replay them on the target system to keep the maintenance window as short as possible. We already have heard about physical migration and logical migration. Now, the important info here is when using zero downtime migration, the tools we use for a physical migration are Recovery Manager and Data Guard. So we use Data Guard for an online migration to keep the databases in sync. And when we do a logical migration, we use Data Pump and Golden Gate in the background. So Golden Gate is used for online migration, again, to keep the databases in sync. Important information here is physical migration is currently not available in DMS. So when we talk about DMS, we always talk about a logical migration where we extract the data and load the data. And then we also classify between direct connection and indirect connection in DMS, which just specifies if we have direct access from within DMS to the source system, or if we need a system in between where we need an additional agent installation. Now, let's compare zero downtime migration and the database migration service. So we already know that OCI database migration is using zero downtime migration in the backend. And the important thing here to understand is if a customer uses zero downtime migration, this is a user managed software. So the customer needs to download ZDM, needs to install ZDM on a Linux VM or a server. They need to patch ZDM, and they do the whole job management in ZDM via config files directly on the Linux console connected via SSH to that server. DMS is then the fully managed service, our OCI service, based on ZDM. So we have the nice graphical user interface sitting on top of ZDM, And ZDM in this case is managed by Oracle Cloud Operations in the back end. So the customer has no access to that ZDM running in the background. We give the customer just the graphical user interface to configure and manage that ZDM instance, but that is completely managed by Cloud Operations. We have already seen physical online and offline migration is only possible with zero downtime migration. The logical online and offline migration are available in both systems. Again, zero downtime migration has no graphical user interface. DMS, of course, has a graphical guidance. Both systems have CPAT integration. You probably have heard about CPAT. It's the Cloud Pre-Migration Advisor tool. And this is a little Java program that we run on the source database to find out if there may be some issues when we migrate that database to OCI. So for example, if we migrate a database to Autonomous and we want to find out if the source database maybe is using some features that are not available on Autonomous or just available in a limited function on Autonomous. For that, we use a CPAT. And both tools have a really, really nice integration of CPAT. And especially DMS gives you interactive CPAT reports. And I will show you in a few minutes how that looks like. And ZDM then also has some additional use cases. So for example, if we want to migrate on-prem to an Exadata clouded customer, for example, we need to go with ZDM. So DMS cannot go to on-prem systems. We only support OCI targets in DMS. And with ZDM, then there are additional use cases like fleet migrations. And we also have the possibility to implement user action scripts, so where we can run custom scripts in between migration steps. Okay, now let's have a look about the supported sources and platforms for DMS. We support all databases starting from 11G upwards as source databases. So the minimal version we can have is 11.2.04, and this goes up to Oracle 21. And as source platforms, we can have Linux running on x86. We support Amazon RDS as a source. We support AIX and also Solaris. And of course, we also support OCI source platforms. So you can also use DMS, for example, to migrate a database running on base database service, and you want to migrate that to Autonomous database, for example. And because we already know that DMS is always using a logical migration, and for that we extract the data and we load the data into the target system. Of course, we can go cross-version. So our source database can be a 12C database, and we can use DMS to migrate the data into a 19C database, for example. And we can also do transformations from non-CDB to BDB, from non-RAG to RAG databases. So we are really flexible with that migration approach. And for the targets, of course, we support Autonomous database, we support shared and dedicated, and we also support our co-managed database services like the base database service and the Exadatabase service. Okay, here is a short workflow how DMS works. We already said we have our source databases. Here in the middle, you see the database migration itself. We have the integration of the CPAT tool. We already talked about that one. And we also know that DMS is using data pump for the extract of the data and the import of the data. For that, we can use either database link or object storage to store the extracted data. For database link, we only recommend that one for smaller databases, so approximately databases not bigger than 50 gigabytes. The reason for that is because there are some limitations when it comes to performance and parallelism with database link. And if we do an online migration, then on top of the data bump, extract, and import, we then use Golden Gate to replicate the changes from the source to the target. Yeah, and here we have our target databases. We already discussed that. So let's have a short look now at the migration steps we need to configure or execute when running a migration in DMS. The first one, of course, we have some prerequisites for DMS, and the big one here is the network. So we need connection from within DMS to the source system and also to the target systems. For that, we also need to have some firewall rules enabled. For example, the listener port to connect to the database. We also need to provision our target database. Remember, we do a logical migration. We can't copy over the data files and start a new database out of that data files. We really need to create our target database upfront, and then we load the data into that database. And if we go with object storage as a storage for the extracted data, we need to create a bucket upfront. And we also need to create an OCI vault because DMS stores all the passwords to connect to the source and target system in this OCI vault. And if we want to go with an online migration and use Golden Gate, we also need to provision an Oracle Golden Gate VM. And I will show you in a few minutes how to do that. And then, of course, we need to configure our source and target databases. There are some parameters that need to be set, especially when going with online migration for Golden Gate. So we need to enable special logging mechanisms on the source database. We need to create the Golden Gate user and give permission to the Golden Gate user. We then set up our migration in DMS. We validate that migration with the help of CPAT. And then we can start our migration and basically export the data and import the data, and also set up the Golden Gate replication. And the final step here is then to switch the migration to the new database. Now, maybe let's switch now to the OCI console here, because I will try to guide you a little bit through all these steps. Actually, we can't do a full migration now because that would take too much time and we would spend most time waiting for things. But I have prepared a few things and I can really guide you through all of these points that I've shown you. So here on the menu in the OCI console, you can find the menu point migration and disaster recovery. And here is database migration. Let's click on that one. And the first thing we need to do now, remember point one was we need to register our databases. We need to register our source and our target databases. So let's click on register database. We need to give a name for that, specify a compartment. And here we need to specify our vault. Remember, this was one prerequisite to create a vault because DMS stores the password I told you in that vault. And then we need to specify our database. And if we are migrating from or to an OCI database, we can directly select our type here. So for example, if this is an autonomous database, I can directly select the autonomous database. I then get a list with all my autonomous databases that are in this compartment. I can directly select the autonomous database. And this is a very important thing here, create private endpoint to access this database. We need to enable that one if the database we have specified here is in a private subnet. So if we are going over a public subnet and this database is reachable over a public IP, we don't need to create a private endpoint. But if it's sitting in a private subnet, and I think most of the databases are in a private subnet for our customers, we need to create that endpoint. And then we also need to specify a subnet to create that endpoint. And DMS does that automatically. Now in the next step, let's uncheck this one now. Now in the next step for the autonomous, I just need to specify my username and password for the autonomous database. If we specify a target system that is running, for example, a source system that is running on-prem, we can specify here manual configure the database. We then select the type you can see here, we can also specify RDS on Amazon as a database type. Let's go with Oracle for now. And then we have to specify here the host name, the port, and also the service name to connect to that database. And when I click next now, you can see that screen changed a little bit. Before, with the autonomous database, we only had the username and the password because that's the only thing we need to connect to an autonomous database. But here now, we also need to specify the SSH parameters, the SSH host name, the private key file to connect to the source system, and the username and also the pseudo location. So basically, DMS or setDM that is running in the backend then really logs in via SSH to the source system to start the migration. And here we can also specify TLS parameters if the database is running with TLS configured. Now, one important thing here, we already talked about that we need to register our source and our target databases. And we also need to register the container database and also the pluggable database. So if the customer is migrating to pluggable databases, we need to have one connection for the pluggable database and also another one for the container database, especially when going with Golden Gate and online migration. So let's click cancel here. You can see I have already registered my databases here, and you can see I have registered a source database, a CDB, and I have also registered here my PDB, and my target is an autonomous database that I've registered here. Now, when we have registered our databases, the next step we will do is we set up a migration in DMS, and let's go to migration here. And for that, we click on create migration. Again, we need to specify a name for the migration, choose a compartment. And here we can specify if we have a direct connection to the source system or not. You remember when I showed you the overview of the migration types, there was this, in the last points we had, there was the direct connection and the no direct connection. So for now, we will go with a direct connection to the source database. And again, we need to specify our vault that we already have created. Click next here. And here now we need to specify our databases, our source database and our target database that we have created and registered up front. So in this way, I select my source database. And you see here, you can select if this database is a pluggable database. I will need to check this one. And then it says, please give me also the container database for that one. And then I need to specify my container database. So that was the reason why we had to register both connections in the registered database, because you need to specify both here. And for the target database, I'm now specifying my autonomous database connection here. Click on next. And here we can specify how we want to do the initial load. I've shown you that already in the slides. We support database link. Again, only recommended for smaller databases, but we can also use the object storage. And then when we use the object storage, it asks us to provide a bucket here. I've also already created that bucket in my compartment. And then we need to specify a directory object that DataPump uses to export the data on the source system. Just give it a name there. And here we can specify now if we want to do an online migration and if we want to use Golden Gate for that. So we enable that one here, and you can see we now have to provide lots of parameters for Golden Gate. And we said as a prerequisite, when we want to do an online migration and use Golden Gate, we have to provision that Golden Gate service up front. Now let's open another window here because I will show you how to do that. So for that, we can go to the marketplace. Search here for Golden Gate. And here, the last one, you see we have a marketplace image, Oracle Golden Gate database migrations. And select that one. This is the image that we should use for database migration service and also for zero downtime migration. And the important thing here is that the license for Golden Gate is included here, and it's free for 6 months. So if customers reach the limits with 6 months, then they can shut down this VM and start up a new one. But basically, we provide free Golden Gate licenses for use with ZDM and also with DMS. And yeah, we just need to launch that stack. And in the end, what we get is a VM with a full running Golden Gate installation. We get a URL to connect to that Golden Gate instance with a username and a password. And coming back here to my DMS screen, I then need to specify here my URL. After I've installed the image, the username and the password. And then, of course, I need to also specify how Golden Gate will connect to the source and the target database. For that, we need, I told you already, we need to create a Golden Gate user in the source and target system. For Autonomous, it's really easy because Golden Gate user is already there. We just need to unlock it. And then we also need to specify these parameters here. And yeah, now let's click on these advanced options here. So, because there are more important things we can configure with the DMS migration. And the first thing here is we can specify include and exclude options. So remember our example we had with the text file where I said we have 100 pages, but we are only interested in 20 of them. The same applies here for the database. So for example, I can say, I don't want to migrate my full database. I just want to migrate everything from my AAA schema. Or I can also break that down to specific object types. So we can really define what exactly we want to migrate from the source database. And we can also exclude things from the migration operation. Important information here, you can either specify include or exclude. Of course, you can create other objects, but the action stays the same. So you cannot exclude and include in the same migration operation. Then we also have some parameters for the initial load. So how the data is transferred to the cloud. The default here is curl. We can also use OCI CLI for that. But then we have to install the OCI CLI on the source system, and we need to specify the path here. And then there are some data pump parameters. So if you are familiar with data pump, you more or less are familiar with these parameters. So we have the job mode, which is schema by default. We can define what DMS should do when the table already exists on the target system. Should we skip? Should we truncate the data? Should we append them? Then some parameters for the performance, for parallelism, and also for remapping and broken down to the data file or schema, table, and table spaces. You can also see here that for Autonomous database, DMS already knows that I'm migrating to Autonomous. It will automatically remap all my table spaces to data, because on Autonomous, we're not allowed to have other table spaces. So DMS is fully aware of that and will do that automatically. And it's also important to understand that all these parameters are set to best practices by default. So you don't have to find out what are the best migration parameters when going to Autonomous and what parallelism should I use. So we set that by default to the best values already. And then we have some parameters we can specify for the replication for Golden Gate. We will skip that for now. There's some tuning for Golden Gate. And here is one important point also for the validation. Here we can specify to run the CPAT, the pre-migration advisor tool, during the validation. And also if you want to continue, if we face some issues or errors during the run of the CPAT. Then we click create, and basically we end then up with a state like that one. I have prepared already one migration. So you can see We have then an active migration here. Here we can see our selected objects. In this example, I have included everything from the setDML schema. And everything that we have specified when we created the migration, we can change here. We can change our source database, our target database. We can change the migration options. So it's fully flexible if you want to change anything here. Also, one important thing is when we run a migration in DMS and we have successfully completed that migration, it's not possible to rerun the same migration again, but you can always clone an existing migration. So if you want to redo a migration or just want to change a few things, you can always clone a migration and then run the clone one. And the next step after we have created our migration is then to validate that migration. That was step number 3. And for that, we click on validate and confirm here. And I've already prepared another migration, the number 2 here. You can see the state changed to accepted, where I executed the validation. And let's go here now to that job for that validation. You can see we run through different phases of the validation. So basically what it does is it checks, can we connect to the source database? Can we connect to the target database? Can we upload to the object storage bucket? So everything we need to make sure that the actual migration succeeds. And there is one important thing here. You can see validate pre-migration advisor. And that basically is the integration of CPAT. When I click on that link now, you can see the output of CPAT. You can also download the CPAT file. And if you're familiar with CPAT, normally you need to install CPAT and then run the Java program. And what you get is an output like this. This is a text output from CPAT. You also have information in there about the source database, the patches, and then all the checks that have been executed on the source database, and if there are some issues found on that database. You can also export that as JSON, but the standard output is a text file like this. Now in DMS, as I've shown you here, we really have this interactive report now. So we have all the checks here. We immediately see what is the result of this check. We can also click here to see the checks that we have passed and click on one check here. In this database, I have created a table with a data type ORD image, which is not supported on Autonomous, and it says they are not allowed in Autonomous database. And what I can do then here is I can directly select that object and can say, I want to exclude that table. I'm not interested in that table. I know that this table has this data type, but I don't want to migrate that. And then that table is automatically added to my migration to the exclude list. So it's a really, really nice integration here. And we can also mark the check as reviewed to go through all the checks here, because we need to make sure that we have no review required or action required before we start the migration. Now let's go back here to my migration. I then have already fixed everything, so I can show you the output now. You can see we have no action required, no action reviewed. We only have some suggestions. And for example, this one says we have some objects where the default table space is not data. But again, it says the impact is that this will be modified in Autonomous automatically to data. So that's fine. So basically, if you're in a state like that, we can start our migration. And to start our migration, we then go to our migration and click on Start. And when we start the migration, what DMS does, or actually what setDM in the backend does, it executes that migration in different phases. So we have one phase, for example, to extract the data from the source database, another phase to upload it to the object storage, another phase of the import. And what you can do in DMS here is you can specify that you want to pause after a specific phase. And when you click here, you get a list of all the phases. So for example, I can say, after I've uploaded my data to the object storage, I want to make a pause because I want to check something on the object storage or things like that. And what you normally do with an online migration is that you pause the replication at this step here. Because in an online migration, we want to keep our maintenance window as short as possible. And so basically what we are doing is we already prepare the whole migration up front. So we start the migration, we start the export of the data, the import of the data, and then we want to keep our databases in sync. And only when the maintenance window starts, we want to finalize the migration with the switchover. So we want to stop our application. We want to replicate only the last few changes to our target system. And then we want to start again the application and connect it to our target database. So we want to stop at this stage here. And then we click on start. And yeah, I have already prepared another one. Let's go to this one. You can see the state here is also already in waiting. And you can see we already again run the evaluation, and then I started the migration here. Let's click on that job. And now you can see that we run successfully and have completed the validation, the data loads, the import. We have set up the Golden Gate replication. And now we have paused at this step, and basically the source and the target databases are kept in sync now. So let me just switch to my terminal here. On the left side, you can see my source database. We have 5,000 records inserted into that table. And on the right side is my autonomous database. And what I can do now is, let's add another 1,000 records. You can see we have 6,000 records already here on the source system. And we also should see, yeah, you can see we also have the 6,000 now here. So basically all data we insert now in our source system is replicated via Golden Gate to our target system. And that's the state we want to have before we start our maintenance window. And let's go back to OCI now. So when we start our maintenance window, we stop our applications. Then we click here on resume. We do the final switchover, or we can do also the cleanup. For the maintenance window itself, you just need to do the switchover step. The cleanup just removes some log files and removes the Golden Gate configuration. But with that, you can really keep the maintenance window at a minimum. Now, one important thing also here is in DMS, it's not possible to reverse the replication. So if you have switched over to the target system, you cannot reverse the replication and then replicate from the new source database to the old source database. That's something you can do with Golden Gate, but that's not implemented in DMS. So you can only replicate one way from the source database to the target database. Yeah, and basically when we clicked on resume here, we have finalized our migration and completed our migration. Maybe one important thing also here, of course, we can download all the log files for DMS. Then what you get is you get a job log from the zero downtime migration instance that is running in the backend. You can see what the steps are and what DMS is doing. And if I go to the initial load, for example, we can also download the log file for the import operation. What you then get is you get the log file from the data pump import. So if you really want to know what is going on in the background and what's going on during the import or export operation, you can directly have a look at the data pump log file here. Okay, now let's switch back to my slides because I have one final slide, and that slide is the pricing. And basically, DMS is free to use. So what is included? All the software that you have seen, the complete cloud service itself, also the underlying zero downtime migration instance that is operated by cloud operations. Everything is included. We already said that also the Golden Gate license is included, and also if we need an agent, because we don't have a direct connect to the source database, this is also included. What is not included, the compute instance that we need to run the Golden Gate is not included. So the customer does not have to buy licenses for Golden Gate, that they are included, but the compute instance that the Golden Gate runs on, this needs to be paid. And there are also costs, of course, for the object storage, the buckets we use to upload the storage, the export, and OCI streaming. OCI streaming is used when we use agent migrations where we don't have a direct connect to the source database. Then we also have costs for streaming. And of course, all network configurations like fast connect are not included with DMS, and also not the source and the target database costs. Yeah, they are not included. There are two exceptions. For migrations that run more than 6 months after they have been created, and migrations running for more than 60 days idle, where there is no data transferred in the past 60 days. So let's go back here. If you have a migration here sitting in a state like that with waiting and not succeeded or active, so if you have a migration sitting in that state for more than 6 months, then we charge 20 cents per migration hour, which makes absolutely no sense, because yeah, it just makes no sense to have a migration sitting there for 6 months in that state, also for 60 days idle. And if a customer needs more time, then they always can cancel that one migration, and that I've shown you. They can clone an existing migration and then restart that new migration. Okay, so this brings us to the end of our session today. I hope it was useful for you.